This morning, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has become the latest world leader to outline their plan for responding to the energy crisis brought about by the US-Israeli war on Iran. An hour earlier, the Australian Prime Minister gave a rare address to the nation as cuts to fuel tax in the country began to bring down petrol prices. And in Germany, gas stations will now only be able to raise pump prices once a day as costs spiral. Here, the Prime Minister has warned that it's inevitable that the war will impact the future of the UK, but reassured the public that his government has put in place the measures to withstand it. Sir Keir Starmer didn't announce any new policies, but pointed to previous measures, including capping energy bills and keeping fuel duty cuts in place until September.
This is not our war. We will not be drawn into the conflict. That is not in our national interest. And the most effective way we can support the cost of living in Britain is to push for de-escalation in the Middle East and a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, which is such a vital route for energy. To that end, we're exploring each and every diplomatic avenue that is available to us. The Foreign Secretary and the Chancellor have met their counterparts in the G7. The Defence Secretary has been in the Middle East speaking to our partners. And the UK has now brought together 35 nations around our statement of intent to push as one for maritime security across the Gulf. And today I can announce that later this week, the Foreign Secretary will host a meeting that brings those nations together for the first time, where we will assess all viable diplomatic and political measures that we can take to restore freedom of navigation, guarantee the safety of trapped ships and seafarers, and resume the movement of vital commodities. Following that meeting, we will also convene our military planners to look at how we can marshal our capabilities and make the Strait accessible and safe after the fighting has stopped. Because I do have to level with people on this. This will not be easy.
Well, the Prime Minister also announced a new summit with the European Union, saying the UK's long-term interest requires closer ties with Europe. He also responded to comments from the US President Donald Trump to The Telegraph, saying he was strongly considering pulling the United States out of NATO.
Firstly, NATO is the single most effective military alliance the world has ever seen, and it has kept us safe for many decades, and we are fully committed to NATO. Secondly, that whatever the pressure on me and others, whatever the noise, I'm going to act in the British national interest in all the decisions that I make. And that's why I've been absolutely clear that this is not our war, and we're not going to get dragged into it. But I'm equally clear that when it comes to defence and security and our economic future, we have to have closer ties with Europe. That's why we had the summit last year. This year, as I've just announced, there'll be a further summit. We will make good on the commitments that we put in place last year, but we will also go further in relation to the alignment.
Well, let's speak to our political correspondent, Ian Watson. And Ian, no new policies or measures today, unlike other world leaders have announced after what's been going on in the Middle East. Will that be something that Keir Starmer is likely to be criticised for?
Yeah, undoubtedly will, actually, by the opposition and indeed the media, of course, asking when can they expect to hear details of any package of help for people. He said not once but twice this won't be easy. Once in relation to the Strait of Hormuz, where obviously the oil is not flowing from at the moment, and secondly, more widely in terms of the economic impact of the conflict. So what people wanted to know, I think, including some of the people at the press conference, was when we could expect certain measures to be put in place. For example, help with energy bills. What he wanted to emphasise was that as a result of government policy, energy bills were coming down and staying down for the next 3 months. But he, like the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, tended to suggest that when any help did kick in if the conflict is protracted, that wouldn't happen until the autumn. He said that only 7% of energy use was during the summer. So some people might be worried when the energy price cap is lifted in July that they will see the bills going up and won't have any immediate help. Obviously, we know that help, when it does come, will be targeted, but again, no more detail on how it will be targeted, what level of household income people should have. And with Australia, for example, cutting its fuel duty, Ireland doing much the same. He was asked directly by the BBC what he was going to do about fuel duty here, and again he said, well, it remains the cut remains in place until September. So again, no guarantee that would be reversed, even though just about everyone expects that if the conflict is protracted, that is exactly what he'd do. So it may well be that Downing Street has a plan to roll out its measures at certain times. It's also facing, of course, local elections in England, national elections for the Scottish and Welsh parliaments. So, there is a lot going on beyond this conflict, and it may well be that he wants to make announcements at specific times. But we didn't get much more detail today. I think what we did get in terms of direction of travel, though, was interestingly, he chose to emphasise having closer relationships with the EU. We knew there was going to be a summit this year in the summer, but he also talked up the prospects for that summit. He said it wouldn't be a stock-taking summit. He was going to be far more ambitious. So I think he was trying to say, look, we have a crisis here, but I've also got a long-term strategy for trying to grow the economy and to bounce back. It's also one, though, which drew very clear dividing lines with Reform UK, for example, going into those elections that I mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, he was asked very clearly, wasn't he, about the pivot, whether there was a pivot from the US to Europe. And it's all in response to the relationship with the US. It was interesting. He said sort of the similar thing a couple of times: whatever the pressure, whatever the noise, I am the British Prime Minister and I have to act in our national interests.
Yeah, I don't think we should see everything entirely through the prism of the forthcoming May elections, but it certainly is the case that Keir Starmer, as a party leader, is unpopular, that his party is trailing in the polls. But one thing which seems to have struck a chord with the British public is having this distance, perhaps as a matter of circumstance rather than choice, but a distance from President Trump, and also his guarantee that there wouldn't be any UK involvement in offensive action against Iran, that the action we take is defensive. That seems to be playing relatively well in the polls, so it's not surprising that he re-emphasises that. It was interesting that he didn't get involved in some of the rhetoric that Donald Trump has been involved in, but I thought there were some interesting things that he said. He didn't just go on particularly about not getting dragged into the war. He also talked about people being worried by the aggressive rhetoric that they heard. They didn't say who was responsible for that aggressive rhetoric, but I think we could probably have in mind the President and his Secretary of State for War in the United States.
Yeah, and there's plenty more analysis from all our correspondents. Ian Watson, our political correspondent, thank you, and plenty more analysis from our correspondents on the BBC News website. There is a live page running at the moment, which will keep you updated with all the latest developments.